Hello, here we highlight and present in this talk to supplement our reading and mind tap activities, Chapter 2, Planning a Healthy Diet or Eating Pattern. The main objectives of this, learning objectives of this chapter is to explain how each of the diet planning principles can be used to plan a healthy diet. There's 6 principles we'll present here. Use the USDA food patterns to develop a meal plan within a specified energy allowance, and compare and contrast the information on food labels to make the selections that meet specific dietary and health goals. There's lots of diets out there that you hear about, many celebrity diets. Here's one in recent years that has caught a lot of media attention, especially around last year's Super Bowl. Tom Brady, perennial quarterback, now with Tampa Bay Buccaneers, making appearances in 7 Super Bowls, unbelievable. But he and his wife do have their own diet, the TB12 method. Interesting diet, mostly media and marketing. The Tom Brady diet encourages intake of organic, local foods, alongside plenty of water. Although there's no research that focuses specifically on this diet, some of the parts of the regime may lead to weight loss and improved cardiovascular health. There's no obvious risks to the diet, however, it's quite restrictive. Someone may find it difficult to commit to the TB12 method over long term. They could also put weight back on if they discontinue the diet. A person who wishes to follow the Tom Brady diet should aim at 20% intake of meat and fish, 80% intake mostly of fruit and vegetables. They also should avoid processed food, nightshade fruits and vegetables, trans fats, alcohol, and caffeine. This was a review written by Juliana Kabbalah last year. Though the diet takes in a lot of good principles, it's a review is pretty detailed and very nice review, and points out some pretty important factors that are the downfall of diets that could be appropriate for all people. But it certainly seems to work for good old Tom Brady. Each year, good reviews are written up in U.S. World and News reports ranking most popular and effective diets, and pretty well done. Over many years, these 3, or at least the 2 that you see there, Mediterranean diet and DASH diet, usually making the top 1, 2, or 3 positions. But an interesting thing to look at, and good written reviews referencing some good information. But all good diets follow certain principles and guidelines, and there's 6 that have been written about, and so they are adequacy, that is sufficient amount of energy and adequate nutrients provided in the eating pattern. Balance, that is not too much, but just enough of different types of food. and calorie control, principle of energy in, energy out that is used is mostly appropriate. One of the big principles is nutrient density. If we look at two breakfasts that are shown here, we have one that we could call nutrient dense, that is nutrients, important nutrients on the numerator, if you might make it mathematic, and on the denominator, the amount of calories. So we want to get as much nutrient per calorie intake as possible. That's nutrient dense. And if we compare these two breakfast, we get some important nutrients there: protein, fiber, vitamin D, calcium, iron, and potassium. You see the nutrient dense breakfast far exceeds and meeting a good percentage of the daily recommendations for each of these nutrients. So the principle number 4 is nutrient density. To get the most nutrients with the least amount of food energy. Low nutrient density foods like a donut or like candy are not nutrient dense. They are nutrient low density foods. The fifth principle is moderation. Occasionally versus regularly eating food. Occasional foods, you might say that these are large desserts or desserts in general, occasions, family occasions where we indulge a little bit, versus regular, balanced, reasonable size portion eating pattern. And finally, number 6, variety, improved nutritional adequacy, choosing from among the various food groups. So these are the principles of diet planning, the good principles and guidelines of diet planning. ABC, DMV, way to remember this: adequacy, balance, calorie control, kcal control, nutrient density, moderation, and variety. If we look at this energy needs, roughly estimated energy needs of women from in these ranges, see from 2,000 kcals to 1,600 kcals in men, a bit higher, 2,600 to 2,000. You see the age ranges changes the amount of energy needs, and these are just your base basal metabolic needs without taking into effect the activity. Dietary guidelines for Americans: every 5 years, a publication comes out of our best and brightest government and university researchers focused on habits and nutrition and lifestyle in the U.S. We come out with guidelines for improved health. And these are key guidelines, and they're really perennial. Every 5 years, something like this. Sometimes there's new findings that are highlighted, but the key ones of the last report were: should look at eating, healthy eating throughout a lifespan, variety, nutrient density, moderate amounts, watch the limit empty calories, like highly sugared, saturated fat type foods, reduce sodium, choose healthier foods and beverages overall, and support healthy eating patterns. Very general. Then there are details when we look at these reports, which we'll look at them a little bit later. USDA, United States Department of Agriculture, also has been designing plans and content communicating to the U.S. through schools, through media. Original um, The original communications were around the food pyramid, and now we talk about food groups, and they are fruits and vegetables, grains, protein foods, milk, and milk products. And there are recommendations and daily amounts of each of the groups um, based on these, selecting foods from each of these groups. And here's representation of some of the selections one might be looking at. Oh, with a particular kcal, daily kcal intake, and recommended portions of each of these to get the variety from among fruits and vegetables, grains, proteins, milk, oils, and you see at the bottom here, there's what we call discretionary kcals. Discretionary kcals. So discretionary kcals are those that, if all the nutrients required in a daily for the day are met with a certain number of calories, then these discretionary calories can be maybe less nutrient dense. So they might be more fun foods that are left, extra dessert or ice cream or something. But it's a guideline to keep in mind that we want to meet our nutrient needs without going over our uh, energy energy requirements. Serving equivalents. This is an area that's very important to have an idea of what a serving is, and we see that on food labels, nutrient labels. When we look at them, sometimes we're not sure of what exactly is a portion, a serving equivalent. So it varies quite a bit, but it gives us a feel, gives us a ballpark of guiding eating patterns. Uh, of course, ethnic we are. Our country is a melting pot for the very good, especially in the variety of foods and cuisines that we have in our country. And we can appreciate the mixture of types of foods, food sources, when we look at something like Asian cuisine, Mediterranean cuisine, uh, amazing variety of flavors and nutrient contents, Mexican. The way that the USDA now puts out their information and guiding portions and food groups is My Plate. It's used as the educational tool now, and that's what it looks like. It gives roughly about the proportions that is suggested for the five um, basic food groups of fruits and vegetables, taking up half the plate, and then another a little more than a quarter of grains, whole grains, some dairy, and protein, less than a quarter of protein on the plate. So recommendations and intakes. Let's see, of the food groups, what's the food groups that are mostly overconsumed? So it may surprise you, but it is protein. Protein is something that we don't, in general, Americans don't really lack getting enough of. Recommendations state at least 50% of grains should be whole grains, and currently we're far below that. It's about 10% of the grains consumed are whole grains. If you look across, and this comes from our 5-year reports put together at the USDA with experts collecting across the country. Here is 100% meeting recommendations. You see protein far exceeds having everything. Grains, but not the whole grains, but grains we do meet and exceed. We're below on the other three groups: the vegetables, the fruits, and the milk group. Various types of food lists are used as education and guidelines to help with the adequacy, balance, and variety. So putting these plans in action, you might look at menus, and that's a big part of this, is planning to assign food groups to meals and snacks so that one would be more conscious of getting the 5 food groups and what energy do they deliver, and that they're packed with various nutrients. Another part, of course, of food is that we enjoy it. It is a pleasure in life as well as sustenance for good health and well-being. So they need to be factored in to our choices. However, need to consider sugar, saturated fats, and sodium, and that's this kind of thing that people that have a healthy eating pattern have to be aware of the amounts that one is getting in their diet. Now, there's recommendations as to when we go out and shop. How do we get the food sources to do preparation at home, which turns out to be most of the time the healthiest way to create meals at home, knowing what the source of your food items are, and think about the food groups. It might be something that someone could be conscious of on food lists. Have the 5 food groups. What am I getting? Grains, vegetables. Am I getting fruits? What's milk products or substitute for milk products? Some people don't consume milk products, but there are substitutes. And what about the protein foods? When we talk about whole grain, it's an important distinction between just kind of grains. Or if we look at the wheat Here's a wheat kernel, and inside the wheat kernel, we see there's what's called the germ, and this is the place that's rich in vitamins and minerals. And this gives whole wheat, for instance, it's darker color. So white flour, white grain, um, has gotten rid of the most of the germ, and mostly getting the other parts of the grain, and that would be the starches and proteins. Bran is another part, so whole bran flour or whole wheat flour, bran flour mix leaves a little more of the whole grain um, as part of the product. So refined flour is more of a white flour, wheat flour, um, has the has the germ, but maybe not as much of the kernel. Where whole wheat flour has the entire wheat kernel. So you can make a comparison of the nutrients in various breads, where whole grain is the orange bar, and these are the nutrients that are delivered in bran. And we can see that many breads are enriched. That means nutrients added back. They were there, and now they're added back, perhaps after processing. So enriched brings back most of the um, iron and niacin and thiamine and riboflavin. So these vitamins and mineral and folate, but not all the other, not everything. B6, magnesium, not brought back with the enrichment. Neither is the very important component of fiber. The food labels are useful in consulting and thinking about what's in a food, a packaged food that that we may be consuming. Also, restaurants are beginning to label their foods a lot more, even on menus, which is a good trend. If we look at the food label, there's lots of information there. And on the right is the updated label, and highlighting a little more about calories and what are important features, a little more clear on the serving size. This is and this very important improvement in comparing added sugars. How much sugar is added, and that's something that's good for consumers to look at. And there's other good information on a food label. All right, some questions here about our food label. Let's see if we can sort this out. Descending order by weight. Okay, that would be an ingredient list. So the first thing that's listed would be the highest percent by weight. If the first thing on a food label of a processed food is something like sugar or some kind of sugar, you may want to think again. And if the first item is something like high fructose corn syrup, you might want to think again. So good to know how to read an ingredient list. Developed by FDA food labels. Okay, so what would that be? Let's jump to this one. The vitamin D, calcium, iron on the updated label, and that would be it's daily value. Total fat Saturated fat, protein, these are required to be on labels now, and total added sugar, and that's here, and it's also percent of daily value. For example, 3 cookies. Okay, a serving size, very important to be there also, right? This was the... Okay, so we need to know how to interpret our labels. Food labels must present the daily value for these nutrients, and this is a new one here. Originally, it's not there. So here's the updated values needed. So when you look at a food label, there could be others if a food is making some claim that it has a great amount of zinc, then that would be there, but it's not required to be on a food package. This is becoming more common on the front of a food package to have this simpler version called front package label that lists some, kind of critical information like this: calories per serving, saturated fat, some things that we are most important, and maybe won't want to look at the small label and look at this information. So this is important stuff. Sugar, potassium is something we like to see a good amount of, and telling us what percent of the daily value is there. This saturated fat is something we don't want it to be too much of the daily value. And fiber. Fiber is something that for most Americans, it's hard to get the daily value. So this is something in certain foods we do want to see that's a high percentage of the daily recommendation. Claims. These claims, sometimes the way they're worded is important, but some claims aren't completely meaningful, like reduced, free, low. These are not very specific. If a specific health claim is made for a food, it really has to be backed with some reference to some real information, some findings that is published. So structure function, this would mean if some food product claims to be healthy for healthy bones. Okay, so that's a health and structure. We're mentioning bones, and that might be a milk product, it might be cheese or something. So that's a reasonable claim to be made. His claim oatmeal can reduce cholesterol. That's probably related to the fiber that oatmeal offers, and how fiber is shown to take some cholesterol from food and kind of bring it down with fiber, and to not have it fully absorbed. But USDA is important in communicating to consumers. So